In this video, I'm going to show you the best areas in the UK for HMO property investment in 2020. I've analysed over 324 different data points across Rightmove, Zoopla, the Office for National Statistics and Spare Room. And all of these together can help you look at the best and the worst areas in the UK if you're looking to invest in your very first HMO property. I've also wrote all of the details and this data on my own website at wtfpropertyinvesting.com, and you can check it out under the HMO article. If you don't know what a HMO is, a HMO stands for House of Multiple Occupancy, and it's essentially where you take a normal family home and then you start to rent out the house on a room by room basis. So from a tenant perspective, rather than renting the entire house, they just rent one particular room within the house, and all those tenants together are on separate tenancy agreements. A HMO can be anywhere from a small 4-bedroom mini-mo to a large 10+ bedroom, huge scale HMO. They're super convenient for young professionals and students alike, and typically the average tenancy is anywhere between 12 to 18 months, depending on the quality that you have within your HMO property. Firstly, let's start with the conclusion, and then if you want any more information, you can stick around until the end of the video to get the deeper dive into the data. Before I dive into the key summary, please remember that this data was taken in the middle of the pandemic. It was also taken during the summer, so there may be seasonal impacts, and it also doesn't take into account Article 4. Now, if you don't know what Article 4 is, it's essentially a directive that local councils put on certain areas, which means that you need to gain planning permission to convert a normal house into a HMO. So typically, if you're looking at an Article 4 area, it's harder to get a HMO because a lot of councils do decline those applications. Excluding London, rents are highest in Cambridge at £620 a month for a room versus Hull, which is the cheapest, at £300 a month for a room. The most affordable houses for buying a HMO in the UK can be found in Sheffield, Liverpool, Nottingham and Hull. And these prices range from £109,000 to £153,000. Obviously factors can vary. There is the cheaper end of the market and there's also the more expensive end of the market, so this is an average in the middle. The more expensive cities outside of London include Oxford, Cambridge and Bath. London, although very popular and rental prices being very high, is one of the worst places to buy a property because rents are low compared to the price of a property. Therefore, this gives you a low return on investment and yield. When looking at supply of HMO rooms, Manchester, Birmingham, Coventry and Bristol all came up top with the most amount of rooms available on the market, whereas Hull, Warrington, Bath and Plymouth all have the lowest amount of rooms available on the market, which means that there's less competition. The highest demand in terms of tenants can be found in Manchester, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Bristol and Birmingham. But overall, the absolute winners for HMO property is Warrington, where there are 1.4 people for every room available, meaning there are more people looking than what there are rooms available, and Glasgow, which is 1.3 people per room. And they are, for me, looking at all of the data, the top 2 places in the country to create and start your very first HMO property. So we're going to look at where the highest room rents are and the lowest room rents in the UK, where the best place is to buy a property, and where the highest demand is for rooms in the UK. So firstly, let's look at the highest and lowest room rates. So as expected, rents are the strongest per room in London. Outside of the capital, northern cities like Leeds are definitely championing the way. The average room rent in Leeds is £548 per month for a room, and surprisingly Manchester is only demanding £468 a month, and I was a bit surprised that it's less than Leeds. I definitely expected Manchester to be greater than Leeds, so this was a bit of a shock in the data. Liverpool is demanding higher rents than other northern cities such as Sheffield and Warrington by about £10 a month. Not too surprisingly, Newcastle, Hull and Aberdeen, all in the far north, have the lowest room rental rates for an HMO investment property. Typically, the northeast and above has lower house prices, income and rental rates, whereas the southern towns and cities typically dominate the higher rents. There are some southern locations that are ranked quite low, however, due to the high property prices, yet kind of the rent doesn't really reflect that property price versus the north. My summary of this is that typically northern cities give a better return because you have cheaper properties and still quite high rental prices. Next, we'll look into where is the best place to buy an HMO property. So as you can see here, Glasgow, Liverpool and Leeds would give you the best bang for your buck comparing house prices versus room rents when looking at a HMO property. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. I've looked at property prices for a terraced and a semi-detached houses and then compared them against average room rental rates to create an indicator. So the higher, the better. Now, this is a custom figure and I've taken it by looking at the room rent for the area, dividing it by the average property price and then multiplying it by 1,000 just to make the number a bit more friendly to look at. So rather than looking separately at property prices and then looking at the cheapest area for your money, this graph puts those two together to work out the strongest cities combining these two data points together. Towns and cities in the north are dominating the top rankings here, typically where house prices are lower but rents remain higher. So Glasgow, Leeds and Liverpool are all performing very well, along with Manchester, Nottingham and Sheffield. Quite expectedly, a lot of southern locations which have high property prices, they don't really vary too much in rent, only by about £100. And this has a really big impact on whether a deal is going to work or not. For example, in Liverpool, for kind of pound per value, Liverpool is 3.6 times better than London for the money that you would spend. If you was going to spend £200,000 in London and £200,000 in Liverpool, you'd get way more for your money in Liverpool than what you would in London. And lastly, we're going to look at the most interesting point, which is where is the most demand for HMO rooms in the country. There's an extremely high demand for HMO rooms in Manchester, Bristol, Edinburgh and Birmingham, but in some places there's also too much supply for that demand. Now this data is probably the most eye-opening. It takes spare room data and the number of rooms available, then it takes the number of people who have posted ads looking for rooms and then puts the two together as a metric. It's not foolproof, but it's a good way to gauge the number of people looking for rooms. London is removed from this graph as it towers above every other town and city, so there are almost 4 people available for every room in London, so I've excluded this from the data because it towers above the graph. As you can see on the graph, Warrington and Glasgow are the only places in the country where more people are looking than what rooms are available. This means if you have a room to rent in these areas, you can expect a lot of responses to come your way from potential tenants. Whereas Coventry, Hull and Reading are the most competitive for HMO landlords, where there are 2.4 rooms for every person. If you flip that on its head, that means there are 0.4 people for every room available. Therefore, those areas are very competitive, which means that you need to create a killer HMO product that is beautifully designed to even stand a chance of standing out on a crowded market there. Interestingly, Hull and Birmingham are very low on tenant demand. This means that even though there's a good supply of rooms and it's not too competitive there, because the demand is so low, it bumps that competitiveness back up again. So if you're in those areas, you're going to find it harder if you don't have a good product. This also means that tenants have bargaining power, and if you're really desperate to fill rooms, then tenants can bargain with you to get lower rental rates. I hope you found that useful. In this video, we've covered where the highest and lowest room rents are in the UK, where the best places are to buy a house for a HMO in the UK, and also looked at the highest and lowest supply and demand in the country. If you're new here, my name's Matt, and I invest in property on the side and distill insights on productivity, tech, and personal finance. If you haven't done so already, please remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button below if you found any value in this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.